We are back. Looks like we had to do a new stream setup. Let's see. So I just switched to this Restream, and I think it's giving us some issues. Let's see. Uh, okay, somehow the previous stream was just disconnected. Not good, not good. Okay, so I have already started the stream, Anthony. Just
Okay.
if it's like still connected, so we can continue as
Yeah.
we like I'll merge both the videos together and then I'll republish it later on. So yeah, we were talking about like of course whole like idea behind uh, Redwood being a full stack framework for startups. So what we can do is of course I'm really interested in seeing how these things work. I mean, what's because we already have some frameworks, right? I mean, if you see, there are frameworks like Next.js, which is also based on React. There is Gatsby, which is again based on React. So what Redwood is doing different? So can you walk us through the demo and code?
Yeah. You want me to go into the demo? Just real quick before, so
Mhm.
I can kind of say just a little bit about what makes it different from like
Yeah.
Next and all that. So the this is kind of confusing because you'll hear people refer to frameworks like Next and also Nuxt and Svelte as
Hmm.
like full stack frameworks because they have kind of like a back end server component to them. And traditionally, the way the term full stack has been used has been to describe frameworks like Django and Rails and
Hmm.
Laravel. And with those, it's what makes it to me full stack is that it has an entire end to end, front end to back end baked into the project itself, including the database. So
Oh,
when you
okay.
look at things like Next, there's no real like
Yeah.
database abstraction
Cool.
that comes with it. And what a lot of people do is they bring in Prisma and they use Prisma as their ORM. And so with Redwood's using Prisma as its ORM, like people who build their own things with Next, but it's actually built into the framework in the sense that as soon as you generate your first project, it already has the Prisma dependency. You already have a Prisma schema. You already have commands set up to migrate your database. And
Oh.
that whole thing is kind of set up for you automatically. The other big thing is authentication. So, with any kind of application that has users, you need some sort of way for them to log in and then
Hmm.
protect their data. So with Redwood, you have a specific authentication abstraction. You have a use auth hook, and now we have things like Next Auth, which provide kind of
Yeah.
similar things. But again, when you start with Next, you build your thing and then you include Next Auth kind of separately and then configure it yourself. Now, what's interesting is since Redwood came out, there's been a new framework created called Create T3 app, which
Hmm.
is something really interesting that you'll want to look into if you haven't already. And that basically takes Next and then adds in Prisma and NextAuth and stuff like that. And so it gives you an out of the box full stack Next
Okay.
experience. So that's pretty similar to what you get from
Hmm.
Redwood. But before Create T3 app, Redwood was really the only React framework that gave you all of that stuff all together. And so that's why it makes more sense to call it a full stack framework versus something like Next, which is a front end framework with some serverless functions, but that's not really the same as like a full stack framework. So I think that's why a lot of people
Hmm.
get kind of confused about like what is the difference between Redwood and these other things. And that's the main thing. I think of like Next is like 50% front end, like 25% back end, whereas like Redwood is like 50% front end, 50% back end, and it's like all
Oh,
there.
cool, cool. Sounds good. Yep. So
Yeah.
yeah, so it actually clears the confusion what is Redwood.js and where the Next and Gatsby stand. So thank you. So
Yeah.
yeah, let's now we can actually go through the code if you want to, and
Sure.
we can
Yeah.
see. So let me add you, and yeah, you might
Okay.
have to just increase the font size a little bit.
Yep, we'll do. And then I've got a gist here that's just going to be a little demo that I'll walk through. It's essentially what you would see if you just followed along with the docs. And I already generated the project over here because that could take a little bit of a long time to do. So the command here is yarn create redwood-app, and you give your project a name.
Oh, so Redwood has its own CLI as well.
Exactly. And let me pop this out. Okay. And once you start off, you already can. Oops. Just do that. You already can start your development server, and it'll give you kind of like a beginning splash page.
Oh,
So you're going to prefix all your commands with yarn rw, and then the command. So yarn rw dev is the dev command. And then here we see our page.
oh,
So this is kind of the Redwood splash page right here. So it's just telling you, hey, you're seeing this because you don't have any pages yet. So we haven't created any pages in our project. And then this links you to things like this tutorial, docs, community, contributor, stuff like that. And let's open up our project over here. So there's two main things you need to know. You have a web folder and an API folder. Let's just look at the web folder for now, though, and then we can explore the API folder next. With the web folder, it's fairly similar to like a Create React app, where you have a React app like this, and you've got like some error boundaries and a context provider. So do you use GraphQL at all?
I have read about it, never got the chance to use it because of this.
Okay, cool. So GraphQL is pretty important to Redwood. If you don't know it, you can kind of pick it up as you go along. So that's what Apollo is for. That's how you make your GraphQL queries. But let's not worry about that at all right now. So this is going to be our first generate command. This is one of the other good things about Redwood and why we say it's like for startups, because it comes with a lot of these scaffolding tools in the CLI. So we do yarn rw, and then we're running a generate command. And there's lots of different things you can generate. So we're generating a page specifically. Our page is going to be called home, and it's going to be set to our just /route, which is what we're on right now. So if we do that, we're going to see a page is going to appear right here. And then we also see this appear here. So now this is what is set to our /route. So if we deploy this to a site, if I have ajcwebdev.com, this would be the home page. And then this is the component over here. So if we want to edit this, let's do this. See that hello world over there. So any questions so far?
No, I mean, because I can see there are frameworks like Astro, and of course Astro follows similar concept, right? So it also has this page-based, or you can say the folder-based routing, and I think the same concept is here. Homepage is actually a route because it's just a folder, right, inside pages. So it identifies all the pages, everything inside the pages as a route.
Yeah, and so the router is how it's doing this. So this is our routing file, and Redwood has its own custom router, like Next or like a lot of these meta frameworks. And when we ran the CLI command, this is what it did. It created a route, it set the path, it pointed it to the page, and then it gave it a name. The name is for when we want to create links in our front end. And so we'll see that in a second. So let's create an about page. And if we leave this up here, we'll see what changes.
Oh, okay.
So now we have this about /about route, and it's going to look very similar to our homepage, like so. So if we go to /about, we'll see that here. And this is what I meant about the name. So you have this name here. We call these named route functions because you can point to the different links. And then if you want to change what the page is called, then you can do that and it won't mess up your links.
Okay. So it's not a folder-based routing. So I was wrong.
Yeah, it kind of is and it kind of isn't, because the Redwood CLI puts your pages in a specific place and then they're referenced in your routing. So where your folders are, like your folder structure, is very kind of prescribed in Redwood.
Mhm.
But the way that the router is like working under the hood is also because it's referencing this like flat routing file. So it's kind of like a mixture of both, really.
Good. Yeah, got it.
So I'm just gonna copy paste this and this, and this will give us just some links so we can go home and go to about, and we can navigate around. Now, I'm not going to show layouts. That would be the next step in the tutorial, but a layout is just something you can abstract out and then share across different pages. So you can create
Oh,
like a navigation bar and then wrap your pages in the navigation
yeah,
bar, and
got
then
it.
that'll persist across them.
Yeah, got it.
But what's next is going to be the backend. So the API
Mhm.
folder now, we're going to look at the Prisma schema. Have you used Prisma before?
No, I have used, I think, MongoDB. That was the only NoSQL database I have used so far.
Cool. Yeah. So Prisma is an ORM, and you actually can use it with Mongo or
Mhm.
MySQL or Postgres. I would
Okay.
recommend using it with a SQL database, though.
Mhm.
And what's happening here is this is your Prisma schema. So this is where you first define what kind of database you're using. So as I said, you can do MySQL or Mongo or SQLite also.
Mhm.
And then you can we'll end up setting it to an environment variable in our project called database URL. And then this is going to generate the Prisma client, which is how we're going to make calls into our database from our backend. And then this is the actual model for your database. So this is a post model. So this is kind of just like a
Mhm.
blog post. You're going to have an ID, title, body, and then created at. So the ID is going to be an integer,
Mhm.
and there's going to be an ID that's going to just be auto incrementing. So it's going to start ID
Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4. You
Mhm.
can set that to be like UUIDs or something like that. And then title and body are both just strings. And then
Mhm.
create at is a date time, and it sets it when you create a new post. It just gives it whatever the time right now
Alright.
is. And that is our whole model. Now, for our database, I'm going to use Railway. Um,
Mhm.
so if you are using like Mongo and stuff like that, you can also do that here. This was one I just created as a demo. Let me delete this real quick. Have you used like Supabase or like any of these kind of like database hosting
Yeah.
providers?
Yeah, I have used Supabase, and then MongoDB itself has an website, right? Okay, where you
Atlas,
can create.
right?
Yeah, so Atlas, yeah. So,
Yeah, I'm a really big fan of Railway because you can spin stuff up super duper quickly.
mhm.
So you can initialize a project and then add a plugin. This plugin being Postgres, and then it'll give you a connection string that you can grab and put in your project. So if we look over here, we're going to have a connection string, and this will be a database that I'll tear down after this. So don't need to worry about kind of sharing the key,
Mhm.
but this is how you set your environment variable. You just do a .env and then plop it in there. And then we are going to run this command. So yarn redwood prisma migrate dev.
Mhm.
This is going to now take our Prisma schema and our database, and it's going to write some SQL to basically set it up and to create a posts table and then apply it to this database. You give your migration a name. And then now if we look back here, we now have tables. So we have this post table. There's no posts yet. And then there's just this Prisma migration that is so Prisma can stay synced. So now that we got that, this is where the real magic happens. So far we've just written a little bit of front end code, and then we created a Prisma model here. Now to actually get all of like the CRUD capabilities, create, read, update, delete, we're going to just run this single command, yarn redwood. The G is for generate, and then we're going to scaffold, and we're going to create a scaffold called post. And this is going to write basically an entire kind of like admin dashboard. So if we now go back to our project here and go to /posts, we're going to see this interface here. So you can create a new post. This is a blog post.
Okay.
And then save. And then now we've got our blog post here. And we go back and look at our database here. We'll see there's our blog post.
Wow, this is nice. I mean, reminds me of my .NET days. This is what we used to do. So in .NET also we had this scaffolding technique. So you can just define, okay, how this looks like, and then you can create like your entire view based on that. So
right, yeah. So with .NET, that's another one along with like Django and Rails that is like more of a traditional full stack kind of framework. So yeah, exactly. If you use something like that, then you'll kind of get exactly what's going on. Awesome. Now, the thing so right now, nothing that we've done has really been that unique to Redwood. It's kind of just like how it's all been put together. But with this next part, how we do the data fetching, this is pretty unique to Redwood. We have this concept called a cell. And what a cell does is we say that it's a way to make the data fetching declarative. So what we mean by that is you're going to have a GraphQL query to get the data. So if you've never seen GraphQL before, this part might be a little bit confusing. But what you do is you have a query, you give your query a name, and then you query for what you want from the database. So we're going to be asking for the articles, and then we're going to eventually, this is going to be the actual query. So we're going to ask for the articles, and then we're going to ask for the ID, the title, the body, and created at. And then that query, what it does is then you get back this articles object containing your posts, and then you can map over it and then return it. So if we do that right now, we're just going to basically see all of them stringified, and it won't look very fancy. The way you actually see the cell is then you import it. So this gets exported, and then we have different states that your data can be in. So it's already going to handle like a loading state for you. So when it's loading, it'll be in the loading state. If you get an error, then it will give you the error message. So you don't have to like write an error handling logic. And then if there's no posts at all, then it'll tell you that it's empty. And then if there are posts, then it will run this and then map over the posts. So this is what we mean by make sure data fetching declarative, because you don't have to do like if it's like check if the object is here, check if loading, and that kind of thing that you do with a lot of these like data fetching libraries in React. So the way you actually use it is you just then import it as a little component like this, and then just do a little tag like that. If you go back to our home page now, we'll see it's rendering now this onto the home page. And it's just giving us the ID, ID1, and there's the title, there's the body. Let's go back and create a couple more. And the third one. Now we'll see we have all three of these. And if we want to turn it into like an actual component, then we can modify our success over here. So what this is going to do now is we're going to map over the articles, and then we're going to have a header with the title, paragraph for the body, and then this div for
Mhm.
the time. So
Oh,
now
okay.
we have a little bit more of a blog.
Cool. So about
Cool.
the syntax, so the data fetching syntax which we have, so it's like, is it? I can see it's a GraphQL thing, but how it is mapped to your data? So what is behind the scenes here?
Yeah, so that's where the cell itself is basically handling how it gets mapped. So
Mm-hmm.
it is taking this query, and then what it's doing is it's sending it to your GraphQL endpoint.
Mm-hmm.
So if we go to localhost, we've been on localhost 8, 9, 10. Right now
Okay.
there's two things running. There's your React front end is running on 8, 9, 10. Then there's also your GraphQL server is running
Ah,
on 8, 9, 11 / GraphQL. So if we look at this, we can see what kind of queries we can do. And so the
mhm,
first kind of query you can run that doesn't require your database being set up or anything, just to see if it works, is
mm,
this Redwood query. And then you can check for the version. And right now it's telling us we're on version 4.3.1. And if we want to actually do a query, if you do control space, you can kind of see what's available to you. So we were using the posts,
posts.
and then here we can say if we want just the title, we can do
Mm-hmm.
that, and we'll see just our titles. If we want the title and the body, then we can do that. Title, body, and date, time, like that.
This
So
is cool.
whatever your query is, this is going to be your output. This is going to be
Mm-hmm.
your data output, and then it has this basic data object. So
Mm-hmm.
Redwood knows to take this object and then to map it to whatever your success is saying to do. So it takes the posts, and we're aliasing that to articles, and
Mm-hmm.
then the articles, then you can grab out the ID, title, body, and create it at.
Oh, this is cool.
So it basically just does it for you. Like, it's the way it
Mm-hmm.
does it is it has Babel under the hood that kind of like, it's like a figures out how to basically extract out the different states, and it's like a higher order component. It's something that Peter, one of the other framework creators, coded many, many, many years ago, and it's just kind of like an
Mm-hmm.
internal implementation to the framework.
Oh, nice.
Cool. So, all right. So we got our pages, we got our cells, and let's just look a little bit into the code that was written for us in the back end, just so we can kind of understand what's happening here. If we look at first thing, this functions folder, this is kind of where all the magic in the back end happens. This is creating a GraphQL handler that can be deployed to a serverless function. Now, with Redwood, you don't have to run it serverless if you don't want to. This is something
Mm-hmm.
that can be a challenge if you actually have to worry about like cold start times, because when you put your whole GraphQL server in a serverless function like an AWS Lambda, then it ends up having like half a second to a second kind of boot up time if when it's hit for the first time, and then after that it's kind of faster, but
Yeah.
they click off after like 15 minutes. So that can be a big issue. Now, we
Mm-hmm.
were when Redwood was originally built, the idea was kind of that it would build for the future, in the sense that they would build it for a serverless architecture with the idea that in a couple of years serverless would just get better. And it never really got like better in terms of like cold
Yeah.
start times. So instead of keeping it serverless only, eventually we just like made it also possible to switch to a server if you want to.
Yeah.
So if you go and you look at RedwoodJS bare metal, you can find this will tell you how to deploy it like straight to an EC2, and then you can have a whole long running server, and then there's no
Mm-hmm.
cold start time.
Okay.
But if you're just building, if you're just like kind of trying it out, or if you have something that doesn't necessarily need to be like super mission critical, then you can just run it in a Lambda handler, which is nice and simple. And this is the file that kind of stitches it all together. Now, what it's stitching together is first your GraphQL schema. So this is what lets your GraphQL server know how to do all of the CRUD functionality. So you have a type, and your type basically matches your Prisma model, ID, title, body, created at, and they each have their own type. Then you create your query type, and we have two queries here. We have posts, which returns an array of posts, and then a post query if you just want a query for a specific one. So if you just want post ID 1, then I'll give you just the first blog post, or so on and so forth. And then you have mutations, and mutations take inputs. So you have a create post input and update post input. And if we go back here to our post, we can see that if we want to, we can actually edit these.
Okay.
And then it will edit. And then you can also delete them if you want. And so all of that basically came from this is what's called SDL, schema definition language. And this is what the scaffold command generated. So it's able to look at your Prisma model, and then from that, it creates this whole schema with all of the create, read, update. So anytime you need a database model that you're like reading and writing, it basically does it all like that, just automatically for you. And if you don't want to be able to like delete it, you can like, just get rid of it, or you can, modify this however you want, but this is kind of what it just generates for you out of the box. And then the last part is this is now when Prisma generated the Prisma client. This is where the Prisma client comes in. So there's this DB file here, which is bringing in the Prisma client. And this is where we're writing just JavaScript functions to do our kind of SQL. So these are methods that can do find many or find unique. So that's getting your posts or individual post. And then creating a post does db.post.create. Update post is db.post.update. Delete posts, so on and so forth. So this is something that you would be writing yourself if you were using Prisma for another framework, where you just kind of bring it in and then you write kind of your whole backend yourself. So this is the type of stuff that this whole project and all this backend stuff is pretty standard to what you would be doing if you are using Prisma and GraphQL. But you would always be writing all of this from scratch by yourself. Whereas Redwood is like, okay, just give us your database models, and then we can generate pretty much all of this for you.
So, I mean, of course, I have done this in Node.js. So when you create a Node.js API, you have to define all the routes and all this endpoints, and then all the services, and at the end, you write all these queries. So yeah, it's saving a lot of time. Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and it can seem like there's like a lot of boilerplate and there's a lot going on, but the vast majority of this code we didn't write. Like, it was written by the CLI, really. So I think that's where can seem intimidating in one sense, but if you kind of like trust in the conventions of the framework, it actually gives you a lot of guardrails, and having all this convention and all of this folder structure and code that's created for you, it ensures that you are less likely to mess things up, like even just from like basic typos, because all this code it's impossible to mess up. And then also ensures that if you stick with the conventions, then it will help you out with things like auth and then deployment and all of that. So do you have any questions before I go on to the deployment step?
It's okay. I mean, I'm good so far.
Cool. So the next thing is Redwood has setup commands that will not just generate pieces of your project, it will actually configure your project. So like one that we're not going to do would be yarn redwood setup tailwind. Like, you can have it automatically configure your tailwind styling for you. But we're going to set up one of the deployment providers. Now there's a bunch of different deployment providers available right now. If we look at on the website, you can see all the available deployment targets. We have 7 right now. This is what I want. Deployment here. Yeah, so there's the bare metal deployment. There's flight control. There's layer 0. Netlify, Render, serverless framework, and Vercel. Also, you can do it with like a Docker container on like
Mm-hmm.
Fly, but I don't see it right now. Now the Layer 0 one, this is actually the company that I work for. It has changed its name from Layer 0 to Edgio. And so
Mm-hmm.
this CLI command still needs to be updated to make it in sync with the new Edgio CLI. So we're not going to do that one. We're going to do the Vercel one. And
Yep.
so
Can you
for any
just
of these,
take your command prompt a little bit up because your name, I
yeah,
mean, the last command you're writing is like hidden
gotcha.
behind
Yeah,
your name.
cool, sure. Yeah, so this was the command Redwood
Ah,
cell
okay.
deploy. Yeah, and then running that, it sets. Now here, this
Mm-hmm.
is the kind of file that is the like full project configuration. This is what lets your website and API side know what they're pointing at. So our website has been running on port 8910. It calls to the API, and then it's going to set it to an API URL.
Mm-hmm.
So if we now have this, if we see, we can go right now. If we just do 8, 9, 10, 11 forward slash GraphQL, it takes us here. What this is going to basically do is it's going to create a serverless function that is going to
Mm-hmm.
deploy this GraphQL server, and it's going to expose it at whatever the domain is forward slash API forward slash GraphQL. And this is something that's kind of specific to each provider. So if this was Netlify, it would be like functions forward slash Netlify, something that's like specific to Netlify. If you looked at what it originally started at, it was forward slash dot redwood forward slash functions. So this is just the generic kind of Redwood convention before you give it to a deployment provider, but each deployment provider will have kind of a specific way to set the API URL. And then we don't have any other. Sometimes there'll be another file, like if you do netlify, there'll be a netlify.toml. But with Vercel, there's no extra configuration. So at this point, what we need to do is we need to get this onto a GitHub
Mm-hmm.
repository. So we need to do, I'm using the GitHub CLI, which
Mm-hmm.
is just a fancy way to create a repo and push it up really quickly. If we look over here, now see we've got our project up here. And all you have to do to then get it set up on Vercel is connect your Git repository. So we're going to create a new project. We're going to import Redwood blog, and there's a framework preset for it. So that's all good. And then that fills in the build command and the install command. Now for the environment variable, you'll need to grab your database environment variable over here. And then you can copy that in. So there's the name and there's the value. And then this will deploy. And then this will take a couple minutes. So if you got more questions from here, now would be a good time to do that.
So these environment providers are fixed, or we can actually add more. Let's say if I want to deploy it on Google Cloud or Azure, we can
Yeah,
do that.
so it's been a work in progress. So when the framework first came
Okay.
out, the only one that was available was Netlify, and we've been
Uh-huh.
basically adding them on ever since. Now the Azure one, actually, we had someone who figured out how to do that. So if you check, sometimes they'll be in like the community, people will have figured out how to deploy things, and they're not yet in the docs, but
Okay.
you can kind of find ways to do it here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, let's see. Because there's this company called Zeal that
Okay.
has written an Azure Redwood blog. Here we go. That's what I was looking for. So this is deploying RedwoodJS to Azure Static Web App, and then here to Azure Web App Service.
Okay. So both.
Can include these. Cool. And so yeah, and we actually had a Google Cloud Run implementation that we were working on for a while. This is something that never got finished, I don't think. But yeah, here it is. So we have this still open PR from 2020 of adding GCP support. So if anyone wants to help push that over the finish line, you're welcome to do so. But yeah, so deployment is like there's this term actually, Redwood, or that Tom used to use, the universal deployment machine, which I really liked. And so that's the idea being you can kind of just write your project however you want, and then it will be deployed to the internet basically for you automatically.
That's good.
Nice. I think, let's see if this name is taken already. Yeah, okay. So if we now look at our live project, here it is. So we have the domain here. Let me share that. And if we want to look at the backend, so that's saying go to, maybe it's, yeah, that's right. So you can't access the graphical explorer from the project, but you can kind of like send curl commands to it. But let's just do this. So network. Here we can see this is hitting the API/GraphQL, and it's sending this query, articles query, and then you get back this data object with the posts.
But the API won't be accessible, right, from the web, because, of course, for the security reasons.
Yeah, so the API has to be queried from the Redwood app. You can't go to like the graphical explorer like we were in dev. Now, right now, there's no like authentication on it, and there's no actually way to kind of like stop someone from just going and like deleting a post right now.
Yeah.
So this is why if you actually were deploying this, we would have done the authentication step. So in the tutorial, you have here before you deploy, there's the authentication section. So I just for the sake of demos, I usually just kind of want to show how to deploy it, but it's very important that you would need to actually set up your protected routes. That would make sure that people can't then go into the CRUD part of the app and mess with your thing. So for that, you'll have similar thing. You have a setup command, and then you can set up your auth. There is many auth providers, almost too many at this point. We have like 7 different things you can use. So if you want to use a third-party provider, you can do that. You can also just build it yourself with this thing called DB auth. So that's kind of Redwood's like native auth layer. But for the most part, we recommend using a third-party auth service because you're less likely to shoot yourself in the foot if you don't roll your own auth.
True.
All right. So yeah, that's the whole demo.
It's good. So I mean, what is the actual use case? Who is using this? Because I can see, for example, if you see Next.js, or if you see Gatsby, right? The target consumers or the target audience for them is like e-commerce, right? So most of the e-commerce companies or some Next.js, I've also seen the landing pages, right? They're pretty popular for landing pages as well. What about RedwoodJS?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different projects that are using it right now. I'm actually gonna go to we have a awesome Redwood repository with a bunch of apps that people are using. So one that I would call out is Everfund, which
Mhm.
is a donations platform. Let me actually go back to sharing my screen. So we have Everfund
I'll just.
is actually my buddy
Mhm.
Chris, who I host the podcast with. This is
Mhm.
his company he built. And so this is a donations platform, and it's just like a way to integrate payments into your website. So they have kind of developer docs, and then they have a whole UI.
Mhm.
I haven't been in here in a while, but this is usually it's just like it's for like creating dashboards essentially, or kind of more like real time kind of apps. So this is another one. This is Team Stream. So this
Mhm.
is for gaming events, so you can like watch and track kind of like gaming, different gaming tournaments and things like that. Some other applications would be tape.sh. This is a screen recording tool.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's kind of like Loom a little bit. So here
Mhm.
you can see the demo. It's just a quick way to like kind of screen capture simple things.
Nice.
There's let's see, where are some other ones? Commonality. I'm not sure if that one's still being used. Let's see. Okay, so Pull Flows is another. This is an app for kind of tracking or integrating like GitHub and Slack together. And then this is this is for finding a job in tech, like posting roles and then finding roles. So yeah, I would say whatever kind of application you want to build that requires like persisting data and may
Mhm.
require users and more like kind of real time functionality, any of that kind of stuff is in Redwood's wheelhouse.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, that's nice. And I think I had one question I just forgot about. It's okay, no problem. I mean, yeah, the question was, of course, does Redwood supports SSR or SSG by any chance? I mean, of course, it's a full stack framework, so I can understand
So,
it's a server side rendered.
so this is a good question. So with the thing about GraphQL is that the server basically just responds with the data, and then you take the data and then you client render it. So you can do it client side rendered, and that's how it's kind of set up out of the box. If you want to generate a bunch of HTML beforehand and then serve that, then you can pre-render it. So there is a way to pre-render. So that's kind of similar to SSR, but it's at build time, it's not at runtime. So when people talk about SSR today in the Next.js sense, technically Redwood does not actually do that right now because the way it's architected, you doesn't really require you to have to do it that often.
Yeah.
Now, there are situations where people will probably want to do it and people have been asking for it forever. So Redwood will eventually support SSR. Part of
Okay.
getting us to support SSR, what goes along with that is supporting Vite. So right now we have not been using Vite. We've been on Webpack because this thing was built before Vite existed. And we've
Uh,
been working on integrating Vite. And so once we have Vite, then we can start using Vite SSR.
oh, cool. That's nice. And yeah, I mean, I think yeah, that covers pretty much of everything. So yeah, I don't have any questions, but any other thing you want to actually share? What is the future plan of Redwood, for example? And
Yeah, so going forward, finishing out the Vite integration and then getting SSR working is going to be really big. And then aside from that, like we really want to just make like a stable, useful tool for developers. So it's not so much like the thing is pretty feature complete at this point, especially once we get SSR. So I
Mhm.
think making it just a nice stable tool that's not going to like break and require upgrading and people having to rethink their whole mental model. Like that's kind of the goal right now. And yeah, I mean, like one day we might include things like React server components, but doing so would be kind of transparent from the developer because
Mhm.
there's all these Redwood abstractions that kind of like hide that the implementation stuff behind. But the other big thing we just did was we kind of made the auth system more pluggable. So if you want to plug in
Mhm.
your own third-party auth, that's not one that we're already providing. You can do that. So there's like new auth providers coming out kind of all the time. So that is now something that is pretty easy to do because the auth was like abstracted out into its own kind of module. But yeah, I mean, for me, I just like wish more people knew about Redwood and even knew that
Mhm.
it like even existed because it seems like I frequently hear people say they want something like it, and then I'm like, "Oh, have you
Mhm.
heard of Redwood?" They're like, "Oh no, I'll go check it out." And so I think just kind of creating more awareness of the framework would be
Mhm.
what I would like to see. Like I pushed really hard on like getting Redwood out into the world back like 2020, 2021. And then I kind of
Yeah.
like ended up getting a job and like I still do Redwood stuff, but it's not kind of like my full-time thing. So there's not really someone like pushing Redwood like 24/7 like with some other frameworks. So that's why it's kind of harder to
Mhm.
stay present in top of mind in the conversation. But yeah, it's got a great community. It's got a bunch of people working on it. If you're someone who's building a company and you're looking for access to VCs, then it's a good thing for that as well. So there's a
Mhm.
lot of really good benefits to getting into the community and using it. I think the hardest sell for most people seems to be GraphQL because people have an idea of GraphQL as being really complicated and hard to work with. And the thing that they have a hard time, I think, realizing is that the problems they have with GraphQL are specifically what Redwood was designed to solve. So they have this idea in their mind of what it is like to work with GraphQL. So they think Redwood is going to be like that, but it's actually the opposite because what working
Wow.
with GraphQL is like sucks. And Redwood realized that and built something that made it easier. But
Mhm.
you can't really get that across unless you actually can get them to use it or like
Yep,
show
true.
it to them, you know?
True. So, where people can actually connect with the community, Redwood community?
Yeah, so if you just go to redwoodjs.com, you can find a link to our disc, and you scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll find a Discord, a discourse, which is our forum, Twitter, and YouTube, and GitHub. So we recommend you either hop on the forums if you have like a technical question, or if you just want to chat with the community, you can join the Discord. And yeah, it's a very welcoming place. We're friendly
Mhm.
to beginners or experts, and if you've never used React before, GraphQL, that's totally fine. If you're someone who's already like a total pro, then that's cool as well. If you want to contribute, we have good first issues, and we're always looking for people to help contribute.
That's great. So, I think this is going to be my last question.
Mhm.
Does it has TypeScript support?
It does, yes. The TypeScript support was hard fought and won. It was originally written as just a JavaScript only framework. Because if you think about it, a lot of the developers who created it were like Ruby on Rails devs, and there's no types in Ruby.
Yeah.
Like one of the
Mhm.
developers, Rob, has like great hatred for TypeScript, but the community helped out a lot with getting it to be fully typed. And now when you generate your project, it'll ask you at the beginning, do you want JavaScript or TypeScript?
Ah,
And so
okay.
you can just select TypeScript, and then you'll be TypeScript end to end.
No, that's pretty good. I mean, of course, I like to write TypeScript more because I started like as an Angular developer, and
Hmm.
they were like the first framework to introduce TypeScript.
Yeah.
So of course, I don't like to use anything else which is like JavaScript. So yeah, that's cool. I'll explore it. I mean, I'll play around with RedwoodJS and see what can I build. And
Yeah.
about the
Yeah.
CSS frameworks, right? So you're saying there is an integration for Tailwind as well.
Yeah, so it's got integration for Tailwind. It's got integration with Chakra. There's one other one as well, I think, and you can just write vanilla CSS if
Okay.
you want.
Mhm.
So yeah, the styling is pretty agnostic. Like
Uh,
the Tailwind command, it just like kind of configures Tailwind for you, but there's nothing about the framework that's specific to any kind of CSS framework.
Oh, that's cool. That's great. That's great. Yeah, I mean, so yeah, all the best. I mean, I can see the wheat integration would be like really an great push for the framework
Mhm.
as well because many people are actually moving away from Webpack. What's your thought? I mean, just out of the conversation apart from the Redwood, but what's your thought on Webpack? What's happening?
I mean, I love Veet. I think Veet is great. I think it's with Webpack, it was like a super powerful tool that kind of became the standard and could do a
Yeah.
lot of stuff. But eventually, we just wanted something that would be a little faster because like it really slows down your development your development iterations when you're like having to wait for having like Webpack to build your whole product over and over, and just like the configure your Webpack configuration files will end up being like super massive and confusing. Whereas with Vite, and this is probably just because we don't have to worry about so much like the common JS and Node kind of
Hmm.
syntax as much. If you're working in ESM only world with Vite, then your whole life just gets like radically
Yeah,
simplified,
true.
and it's both faster and just easier to reason about. And then also you then have the ability to plug in different frameworks. If you want to
Hmm.
like switch from React to Vue, you can do that really easy with Vite. Now you're not gonna be able to do that with Redwood, but like that's one of the reasons why I really like the general direction the community has gone of like kind of rallying around Vite and making
Hmm.
it incredibly simple to use any framework with it.
Yeah, and the sad part, which I can see is like even the people who build Webpack, they are actually just abandoning it and then claiming it that there is a new version available. No one, I mean, they're saying that
Turbo
it's
Pack.
official. I mean, Turbo Pack, RS Pack, whatever you call it.
Mhm,
So everyone is claiming that this is the next version of Webpack, but not from official team, right? They're still like pushing
mhm.
like bug fixes. They are like still doing improvements. So I'm not sure. I mean.
Yeah, I think that's just the way of the world with open source stuff, and the web and JavaScript is always this like cycle of new things coming out that are influenced by the old things and make some slight
Yeah,
tweaks to be kind of better, and then eventually you hit a tipping point where the new thing is so much better than the old thing that everyone tries to switch over, and it's like I think it's just it's just the way of the world.
yeah, true. I mean, did you got the chance to use Grunt and Gulp?
No, yeah.
No.
So when I started web dev, it was already all Webpack kind of thing, and
Mhm.
what Webpack and Rollup, those are
Yeah.
kind of the main ones. But yeah, I've never used Grunt or Gulp, and at this point, probably never will. Never used jQuery either.
So the jQuery is where I started. Like that was my first time writing JavaScript. Grunt and Gulp I used like for very small time, but it of course. I mean, it was the tool which was needed at that time. And the
Hmm.
Webpack was, of course, again, Webpack came just after Grunt and Gulp. They saw the complications it has
Hmm.
and then tried to simplify it. It was, yeah, I think it has reached at a point that, of course, no one can rewrite it fully and make it
Hmm.
fast. So I think, yeah, choosing a new tool is the way to go. I mean, Angular is going to use ES build. So they also now they are like, of course, Angular being Angular, they will provide the migration, so they never
Hmm.
leave anyone behind. But they are like creating a migration. Like if you are already using Webpack, you can just switch on, or like in future if you upgrade, you can just say, okay, I don't want to use Webpack now. I'll be using EaseBuild. That's it.
Have you heard of Analog, Brandon Roberts
Of course,
framework?
yeah. Because I'm
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah. Yeah, I had
so
him
I'm a
on
big
my
fan of his
Awesome.
work.
Yeah, I figured if you're an Angular guy, you would know him. Yeah, I had him on I have my own stream, and I had him on a couple weeks ago to
Okay.
go through analog, and that was the first time I'd ever written any Angular code. And
Okay.
so like that's pretty cool to have now a Vite Angular kind of framework.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I have a very like old history with Brandon because it was NGRX, his project, which he
Hmm.
maintains, and that was the first project where I contributed. So
Oh,
my
that's awesome.
Yeah, my first PR for like open source was for his project, and then when I started contributing to Angular, I found him again because he was doing Angular documentation at that time. So he was part of Angular team taking care of documentation. So again, I'm like, wow, this guy's everywhere.
Yeah, once you get into open source, like you start to see the same people popping up over and
Yeah,
over
yeah,
again.
yeah. True, true, true. So yeah, I mean, I have to explore analog JS a little bit because I'm working on a new project. I mean, it's called Angular Snippets.dev. So the plan is, of course, once the project grows, I'll just try to introduce analog JS because otherwise people will say, "Hey, you are that's an Angular website and you are not using Angular." So I'm
Hmm.
using Astro right now, but Astro has integration with analog JS as well. So that would be the way going onwards. But yeah, I have to, yeah, I have to actually invite him as well for future streams. Let's see.
Very cool. Yeah, definitely.
Cool. So thanks again, Anthony. It was fun talking to you. So probably we can collaborate again in future, and then we can do few more stuff. I mean,
Yeah,
I
for
can see
sure.
you have been working at a company for as a deferral. Probably
Hmm.
we can invite you on our podcast, which we do every week. We are
Oh,
not
sweet.
doing for next 2 weeks, but
Hmm.
that's like a 30-minute format which we do. Like again, it's a live stream, 30 minute. We
Hmm.
just it's not live coding. We just ask
Yeah.
questions like
Hmm.
based on what you have been doing there. What is the product all about? So probably I'll send you invite as well for that.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. I would love to.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, so thank you so much everyone for joining. And in case you have any question for Redwood, of course you can join the Discord server. You can find it on people on Twitter. There is a Twitter handle as well. You can follow people around RedwoodJS and learn more about it. So thank you again. Bye bye.